Science Magazine presents Ardipithecus ramidus, the most detailed picture of early hominid life.
On the cover of Science, there is the partial skeleton of a remarkable human ancestor. This is Ardipithecus ramidus, and a team of international researchers introduced this hominid, member of the human family, that lived 4.4 million years ago, which is about 1 million years older than Lucy's species, and they flesh it out. And what they are telling us in these 11 articles is that it doesn't look just like us, which is not surprising. You wouldn't invite them to dinner. But it doesn't look just like a chimpanzee either, which is a big surprise.
So instead of thinking of something in between a chimp and a human, we have to think of this as really not a series of links in a chain as much as branches in a tree. And our branch is a very peculiar branch. We have very strange feet and huge brains. How did that happen? Well, we have to work our way back down our branch. And so we're getting pretty close to the fork that was between the line that led off to the chimpanzees and the line that led off to us. And Ardipithecus takes us pretty far back toward that branch and informs us that the node point, the junction, the last common ancestor, was neither human nor a chimpanzee. It was something entirely different.
It's living on the ground, walking upright, like us, spending a lot of time walking upright. If you saw it walk by, the walk would look a lot like ours, but it can't run like us.
The skeleton that we have is estimated to be around 4 feet tall and to weigh around 100, 110 pounds. And so that's why skeletons are important. They allow you to get at things like stature, limb proportions, and all of that. And I think one of the things that we would be most impressed by seeing Ardipithecus in the flesh would be the very small size of her face and brain case, the very large size of her arms and hands, and this grasping ability of her feet. She had a foot with an opposable large toe. It's the first time we've ever seen this in a fossil hominid. All the rest of them, even the Lucy species, fairly early at 3.7 to 3.2, and even with footprints, in the footprints, the large toe is right in line with the other toes. There's already an arch to the foot. Artie's foot was not like that. When Artie walked, it toed off of the lateral 4 digits, and the large toe was off to the side, acting more in stabilization instead of in toe off. And so it's a very different creature. What that does, what the maintenance of that grasping foot does for you, is to open up the arboreal environment.
Well, Ardipithecus ramidus' hands and forearms weren't as stiff as a modern chimpanzee or gorilla's. If you're knuckle walking, going like this, you need to have a very stiff wrist, and you need to have fingers that can handle that weight and all the forces. And there's all sorts of adaptations that Ardipithecus did not have. It had a much more flexible hand and wrist, so it was able to free up the hands to do other things.
So it turns out that that last common ancestor was probably not a knuckle walker at all. Knuckle walking evolved independently in gorillas and in chimps. And that's really one of the biggest lessons of Ardipithecus, is that we can't just take a modern animal like a chimp or a gorilla and use it as a proxy for the last common ancestor. Chimps and gorillas have been evolving for 6 and 7 million years too. And so what we're seeing here is something that we never could have predicted from either a modern human or a modern chimpanzee. The only way to learn about this creature is through the paleontological record.
Where I think researchers will have the most doubt about this analysis of Ardipithecus ramidus is in the proposal that it is a snapshot of the primitive member of the human family and the primitive ancestor we shared with chimpanzees and gorillas, that it shows us that that ancestor did not look like a chimpanzee or gorilla.
If we were a couple of chimps sitting here talking about our ancestor, we'd have very little to say, because there's almost no fossil record of chimpanzees, and there was none, in fact, until a few years ago. We now have a handful of teeth from about 500,000, which are very interesting, but they don't tell us a whole lot about the whole evolution of chimpanzees. There are no fossil gorillas either. And so if we knew these lineages, we'd know a lot more about ourselves as well. And Partly because of this, it's been assumed that the last common ancestor of humans and chimps was rather chimp-like. And you can't deny it because you have no evidence that chimps were any different then than they are now. The significance of this is that it's earlier in time, nearer the last common ancestor. And if we want to know what the last common ancestor was and to try and understand the forces that led to our divergence from a chimpanzee ancestor, this is much more relevant.